Hey, welcome everyone to this webinar series with Angele, Sancho, Passe. Today's topic is creating diversity-rich environments for young children. It is based on Angele's new book, which is a Redleaf quick guide. We are really excited to be having this discussion today. Angele is going to start with more of a presentation, but we are going to be answering your questions as well. So as we go along during Angele's presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A feature. This way you can upvote questions to make sure that we get to them. And Angele and I have already agreed that we're going to do a follow-up recording if we don't get to everyone's questions. So please feel free to ask and we'll do one if we run out of time. You can also chat to us using the chat feature. Remember to hit the drop down to all panelists and attendees. We'd love to hear where you are coming from and what your title is. And yes, these slides will be made available after the session. We'll be sending them out once the recording is available. I'm just going to do a quick intro of Angele. Angele is an early childhood education consultant and instructor with more than 30 years of experience. You work in a lot of programs helping to develop kindergarten readiness and dual language learners. You're a former governing board member of NACCE and a past president of MNACCE. You are also the author of several books by Redleaf, which I've already mentioned. Your newest one is Creating Diversity-Rich Environments for Young Children. So just to make sure that we get through everything, I'm going to hand it over to you, Angele, for your presentation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Meredith. I'm really happy to be here. It's a Good Friday, so I'm glad to be here, and welcome to all of you who are in the audience. So the first thing I want to start with is actually does relate to diversity, and I want to talk a little bit about my accent because it takes listeners about 7 minutes to figure that out, where my accent is from. And so I am, my first language is French. I was born in North Africa, in Algeria, as a French colonial. And we lost the War of Independence. So we ended up, my family ended up as refugees in Spain. So my second language is Spanish. And I came to the United States as a young adult. I am an American citizen, and my third language is English. So I happen to be proficient in all three languages. I write and work in all three languages. But so now you know a little bit about where my own experience of diversity comes from. So here I want to propose some ideas from the book that are not very complicated, but have to be done. And I also want you, as you're listening, to identify the things that you are already doing. And what I will do, the book has 10 chapters, so I will have a little introduction now, and then we'll do like one key concept about each chapter. It's a small book, and that was intentional. We want it to be easy to read and easy to use. So the objectives are to examine what a diversity-rich environment looks like and why it's important in early childhood education. So that's the first thing that we need to do. Is we don't need to ask ourselves why. It is important. To recognize the expertise that you already have, so you increase your own confidence and the confidence of your team. It's to present practical strategies to use with children, families, and colleagues. So along the way, I will make the case that children, families, and staff are part of the diversity of the program, and to help you make a personal plan so you can follow up. So on our next slide, we'll talk about the assumptions and a bit of the definition. So diversity rich means understanding that everyone is unique and recognizing individual differences. So what that requires is conscious practice of mutual respect and sharing each other's cultures. It can be sharing each other's cultures at a surface level, like what kind of cookies we like, but it also needs to be at a deeper level, what we think, in our case, as early educators, about how to support children, how to teach them, and how to support their families. The term diversity rich that I chose acknowledges that our early childhood environments have a vast variety of cultures in the children, families, and staff members, and that it is not enough to embrace diversity. So we need to sharpen our lens to include equity, which I see as fairness and justice in our work with children, families, and our colleagues. So I want to show you the next slide, what the dimensions of cultural diversity are. Based on, this is the 21st century dimensions of cultural diversity. They were probably different not different, but they were less in the past. So we have age, education, ethnicity, the family constellation. As I'm talking, kind of think about yourself and think about your families too. Gender, home and geographic roots, language, mental ability, nationality, neurodiversity, occupation, physical ability, race, religion, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic status. So there are 16 of them on your screen. And as you look at the screen, think of the three main cultural dimensions that you might define yourself with. And would there be the same ones in different environments? Would there be the same ones in your temple? Would there be the same ones in your place of work or at the grocery store even? So think about how you define yourself. Also, I want you to think about the children in your program and their families. We tend to see ourselves in a more complex way. So we tend to look at ourselves with several of these dimensions. But often in our, when we look at others, we may look at them from one of them. And in our case as early educators, for example, when we get funds for scholarships or for grants, when we write those grants and we have to prove that these children are at risk, that is where we are going to put some of these dimensions. So when the children come to our classroom, we have a preconceived idea about what their type of diversity is. So that's what I want you to think about. But we are not alone. We have lots of tools that we can use to figure things out. So on the next slide, I want to show you in chapter 1, we have the frameworks that I use to as the tools and the resources that we already have, so we don't have to invent things. One is obviously the early learning standards that are available in very similar variations in different states and countries. We have the Code of Ethical Conduct from NAYC, which is a nice document, always available, though I think sometimes it gathers dust on the shelves. So I want to pull it out of the shelf. We have the latest position statement of NAYC, Advancing Equity in Early Childhood Education. We have concepts like the writing of Deborah Sullivan, who talks about environments that help specifically Black children learn. We have concepts like cultural pluralism from Janet Gonzalez Mena, and let me read you just very briefly what she says. So she describes cultural pluralism, pay close attention, as the notion that groups and individuals should be allowed, even encouraged, to hold on to what gives them their unique identities while maintaining their membership in the larger social framework. She adds, the goal of diversity is unity. Only when we can come together freely as we are, feeling good about who we are, can we create a healthy unity among all the people of this great society. I think that this is a concept, and I make the case that we should guide our curriculum. We also have the work of anti-bias education from Louise Dorman Sparks. We have the concept of cultural guidance, which means that as educators, we are not cultural invaders, where we tell children and families that their culture is not good and we're going to show them how to do things. But we are telling them your culture is valuable and good, and I will help you adapt to the culture of education so you can have a good understanding. I'm not going to let you figure out things on your own. And then there's the concept of skilled dialogue, which is about coming from the two perspectives of the family and the educator, to not be one against the other, but to complement each other for the benefit of children. And finally, we have your and our personal and professional experiences of educators. I'm afraid that sometimes in the effort to do the right thing, we don't put ourselves into the diversity of our classroom. And that is what I am hoping that we can do. So next, let's talk a bit about my favorite part of the NAYC Code of Ethical Conduct, which is the first part. We shall not harm children. We shall not participate in practices that are emotionally damaging, physically harmful, disrespectful, degrading, dangerous, exploitative, or intimidating to children. So when I think about this, I think, no, of course we don't. And many of my colleagues will say that we're not mean to children. We are nice to them. We don't deprive them of food, for example. We don't punish them. We don't do the dance in the corner anymore. True, we don't do that. But with the sensibilities and sensitivities of our 21st century and our global community perspective, there are other ways that we are harming children in that that we need to pay attention to, because maybe we're not aware. And that may happen when they hear their home language only when the teacher scolds them. So for example, in classrooms where there are lots of children who speak Spanish, and some little children don't want to sit down or don't feel like sitting down, the teacher eventually gets irritated and scolds them, says, siéntate, sit down. Well, the child was not sitting down for some reason, but yelling siéntate to that child is actually harming the child. It shows them that their home language is only when the teacher needs to give them commands. So it would be much better to say sit down in English than it would be in that particular case. We are also harming children when they are picked last to go to lunch because they were the wiggliest at circle time. What are we trying to teach them there? We are harming children when our expectations are lower because their family is below the poverty line. And it's as for about 20 years, I have worked as a master coach and consultant in schools. And so I have seen hundreds of classrooms where what happens is that we have different expectations for children in poverty. We're harming children when they have two dads and there are no books about families with two dads on our bookshelf. The message is there are other things. Squirrels can have a family, but a child with two dads just doesn't exist in our classroom. And also when the teacher ignores the multicultural richness of the classroom. So in any of the classrooms that we have, when we look at the diversity, we need to think about, remember those dimensions of diversity, so we need to think about the richness of it. So I want to just go like a little bit one chapter at a time and give you like a key thing. So here is on chapter 2 where I talk about values and attitude. And here the key points are: be aware, be alert, be intentional. We don't have a choice. And we are not only a global, we are not only multicultural, but we are a global community, and we certainly have seen that lately. So it's not just about ourselves or our little classroom. So be aware, and always be intentional. So when I'm thinking about my classroom, am I using my wise mind? Am I, wherever I am on the political spectrum, do I believe that I need to develop the strength of the children in my classroom? Or do I believe that I need to fix them? So I will leave you with that thought. On the chapter about curriculum, I want us to think about curriculum, and that would be the next slide. Yes, thank you. What does a relevant curriculum, what is it, and how is it co-created with children? Every curriculum becomes a diversity rich. I am very convinced of that. And it becomes diversity rich as soon as we ask the children what they know about it. So it could be transportation, or it could be butterflies. So in my classroom, if I have many children from whatever their backgrounds are, if I have a classroom with immigrant children, for example, and we are doing butterflies. So what are the butterflies in our area where we're living right now? What are the butterflies in their country of origin, or the country of origin of their parents? As a teacher, what were the butterflies like when my grandparents came here from Italy? So a little exercise that we can do with children is the one you probably know about KWL, what we know about the topic, what we want to know, and what we have learned. So not only is it a good literacy topic activity that we can make last for several weeks, but also it immediately brings the children in with their ideas. And their ideas is what will make any topic diverse, if that makes sense. Maybe that's a question that you will have later on. And so in chapter 4, we talk about the physical space. And the key point here is that children need to see themselves. So we need to look at our environment and seeing how children are seeing themselves. Are they seeing their work? Are they seeing their pictures? Are they seeing pictures of their own family? The posters that we have from countries around the world, they are pretty, but if we are not using them and they're just on the wall, are not going to help children see themselves. Are they seeing themselves in mirrors? Are we taking pictures that we are sharing with them and using? Very often in classrooms, we see that at the beginning of the year, the families send their picture and there's a family wall. So are we seeing that family wall change? Or do we see in April the pictures that were there in October? So it's as simple as that. And then the children's work. Are we seeing the progression of their children's work, how they are starting to scribble and how eventually they write their name or they write the word caterpillar. So this is, again, it seems pretty simple. Are the classrooms uncluttered so the children have the opportunity to see themselves? So some more food for thought for you. And on the next slide, I want to talk about the, what do we have? Materials, that's chapter 5. Materials and books and toys. And here the main idea is teaching intentionally. So in the beginning, at the beginning of that chapter, I have a vignette about this family childcare provider who has gotten a grant, and then she is, she's very excited. She bought a set of multicultural dolls and books, and she puts them on the shelf. And then, and this is a true story, she puts them on the shelf, and then after a couple of days, she hears the children talk about the black dolls, not wanting to share the white dolls, and talking about the black dolls being bad. Well, she's very disappointed about that. She doesn't know what to do. And what should she do? Well, what she decides to do is that the following day, she takes all the dolls out and the children have a conversation about dolls. They have a conversation about race. And they talk about the good people. And they talk about some people are bad, some people are good, but it is not related to the race. So eventually her little group was able to get beyond the manipulation of the toys to understanding each other at the 4-year-old level. And that's what I want to tell you about, is that these materials and books and toys that you spend some really good money on and that are quite expensive, on the foods of the world and the multicultural dolls and all of these good things, I want you to think about presenting them to the children and using them with the children rather than essentially ignoring them on the shelf.
Angele, do you mind if I'm just going to
Yes.
quickly have a question. We have a question here from Deborah Shine, who I think that's the Deborah that I know. So
Yes,
welcome.
yes,
So
yes.
glad you're here with us, Deborah. She was asking, did the children do the dialogue or did the teacher guide the discussion? I think she was just looking for a little clarification. I think that's such a great
good
story.
question. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. The teacher guided the dialogue because she was aware that this was, so of course the children, so she engaged the children at circle time several times. But what she did is she discovered, so she felt it was a teachable moment when the children were, when she overheard them, but she did not act right away because frankly, she did not even know, she was a little bit taken aback. And what we know about anti-bias education is that silence is much worse than taking a day to think about it and then bringing up the conversation with the children. Mm-hmm. And on our next slide, about language and communication, the key points here would be to teach English to the children and honor the home languages. And in classrooms where we have a proficient teacher of the language of the children, then we can have a good bilingual program. In many, many classrooms, that's not the case. English is the language of instruction and is the only common language to all the children in the classroom, especially in the classrooms that we now call super diverse. So the idea here is to teach the best English that we can, because children all over the world who are not English speakers are learning English as a second language. So here we are teaching English and we honor, it's not but, it's and we honor the home language. So honoring the home language means having very intentional ways, and it could start with smaller things like greetings, for example. It could be, and then as we develop a pool of people from the community or from the families who can read books and who can have playtime with the children in the home languages of the children, that's how we do it. The intentionality means that we are going to do that not randomly, that we're going to do it at very scheduled times during the week. So for example, a classroom may have International Day on Wednesday. And so I visited such a classroom where the children were English speakers, Hmong speakers, Somali speakers, and the teacher was German American immigrant, third generation immigrant. But what they decided to do, and this was a very nice way to introduce. So when I had talked to her, she decided to do that. So the children on a day of the week, they would do their greetings in the morning to each other in one of the languages of that classroom. They chose the languages because they were part of that classroom background. And so they did hello in Somali and hello in Hmong, and I think there were some Spanish-speaking children too. So in Spanish, and so and English, of course. And so when they did all of that, one day, the day that I was there, they forgot the other language they had. So one little Hmong boy said, "Miss Lisa, we did not say Guten Morgen today." And that was the language of her background. And what was very beautiful about that was that the children then, it was not just like we are the children, we are the diversity here, but the children could understand, and they were most of them were immigrant children. So eventually they would be third generation too, but that they could understand that their teacher of her German American background was part of that diversity. So to me, it was very beautiful to watch. And our next slide is about chapter 7, which is behavior guidance. And this is the one that, as early educators, we need to think about as the most vulnerable to educator bias. So when we think about the diversity in our classroom, we think about the children. If we have a diverse classroom that happens to be in poverty, that happens to have African-American children, that happens to have African-American boys, we need to think about that be alert part that I had in an earlier slide is very important, because this is the most vulnerable to our bias. And you probably know about the research that has been done, the Yale study, for example, where teachers had figured out through the experiment that what teachers had done through the experiment, that they were watching the little Black boys more carefully, waiting for some behavior. And so this is where, when they come into our room, we need to have time we need to take the time to think with ourselves and with our colleagues about what are our behavior expectations. And most teachers are also women, little boys, regardless of race also. So there's the expulsion rate is high for little black boys. It's higher for all boys than it is for girls, for example. And I'm really happy in Minnesota. Just this past week, we passed a law or resolution that expulsion is not going to happen in early childhood. And this is very good news, because we need to think about how are we going to understand children, and what is it that we are going to help them learn. And that's part of being bicultural. So there are some things you do at home, some things you do at school. How are we going to be the cultural guides for these children to understand, to not give them choices that are not good choices, and then we blame them for their choices? So there's lots of good work that is already happening, and a lot of the resources I was showing you at the beginning that we can use, and a lot of it is going to be our own alertness to it and our own discussions with our colleagues. And the next slide. Oh, yes, chapter 8. So chapter 8 is families. And so the notion of reflective dialogue is one that one of the vignettes I have in the book is about an immigrant father who had asked the teacher, a man, that his little boy not play in the housekeeping area because he felt that this was not a behavior that he wanted for his little boy to learn, and for his culture. And so the teacher and the father had discussions over time, and the teacher's perspective, father's perspective, was his family cultural perspective. The teacher's perspective was his ethical responsibilities, as well as his knowledge of developmentally appropriate practice. So what he was, so he became, in a sense, a cultural guide in explaining to the father that in his classroom, he could not deny access to any child to the housekeeping corner. It wasn't just his child, but his classroom was developmentally appropriate, and all children needed to have access to the whole classroom. So in the end, what they decided to do is that, and that is where the family's thoughts and the educator thoughts can see each other. The father decided that he would not let his child at home play kitchen. So at home, that was his choice. But that in the classroom, given what he understood about what his child was learning, that he was going to stay in the classroom and stay with that particular teacher too. So it doesn't happen overnight, obviously. And it means, in this particular case, the teacher was not judgmental. He listened. And he also, he was also confident in his approach and in his ethical responsibility. So a little bit more to think about. And now we are at chapter 9. Chapter 9, colleagues. So colleagues is what I call creating a community of workers, because we work very hard to create a community of learners in our classroom and in our programs. And so here I am saying for colleagues, one of the occupational hazards of our industry, and and it happens in high relationship fields. One of our occupational hazards is actually gossip. And so we have a lot of gossip going on in our programs. And sometimes we rein it in and sometimes we don't. And it's a good idea to not have gossip. The reason is that if we really believe in the social emotional climate and social emotional development of our children, then how could the adults be up here gossiping about each other and then expect that the climate is going to be completely positive? So that's what I want us to think about, is working together, promoting cooperation, and being role models of diversity for our children. And our last chapter is chapter 10. And I wanted to, as you notice, we went from the progression of thinking about philosophy basically and frameworks to what happens inside the classroom or inside our family childcare home, and what happens with us as staff, and then also then what happens in a diversity-rich environment that is led in with program leadership, that is led as a diversity-rich environment. And I think for our leaders in early childhood, the two main points I wanted to say is to continually communicate to our staff, to be fully aware of that equity statement, to be fully aware of the ethical responsibility that we have of communication, what we mean by diversity rich, of integrating all of these dimensions. Again, the children, the families, and the staff. That having a diversity rich environment is really not that complicated, but it does require intentionality, and it doesn't happen by itself. So that investment, it's an investment of thinking, an investment of time. We are very, I mean, we all agree that having staff, that hiring staff who, as we say, look like the children is a good idea. At the same time, what we're going to find in our field is that there are differences in skill, and there are in skill a lot. And so what I worry about is that when we hire paraprofessional staff, or we hire lead teachers who indeed have a good cultural connection to the children, but they don't have the skills to improve the level of education that they are giving to the children, that we don't support them enough. I want us to think about investing. So yes, if I am hiring a bilingual educator, for example, who has a good heart, good rapport with the children, but does not even come from the field of early education and does not have the skills yet, I don't want to let that person fall. I need to be investing and giving this person helping this person get the skills. That is a way to make this person feel more professional. It's a more respectful to invest in that person than to just make do with the skills that they don't have, if that makes sense. And we are basically at the end. How are we doing on time? Oh, very good. So at the end of the book, you have a diversity-rich checklist, which goes through all the different categories that we talked about today. So values and attitude, communication with children and family members, curriculum, environment, behavior guidance, and program leadership. It is not a evaluation tool, but it's a self-assessment. So as a program leader or as a classroom teacher, as a family childcare provider, you can look at this checklist and then see which areas you are already doing. And I know that there are lots of them already. And then which areas that you need to be more intentional about and more alert. And I was thinking in the last, few weeks, we have had lots of things coming on Facebook, and the words from Maya Angelou have been floating around. I did then what I knew what to do. Now I know better and I do better. And I think that when we think about the deeper issues that we are facing in our country and globally, in terms of our understanding of race and our understanding of diversity, I'm proposing that we go to action because we have lots of tools already. And that that I'm hoping that we don't wait until we fully understand ourselves, for example, and where our deep-seated feelings and emotions are, but that we can actually work right away, because the children don't have time to wait for us to get our act together. So I propose that if we do the things that are in these few pages, that we will go a long way.
Great, thank you so much, Angele. We are going to start answering some of your questions. I've been seeing a lot of great ones come in. And again, if we do not get to all of these, Angele and I have already agreed that we will do another follow-up video just answering what is left. So we really appreciate you guys asking such great questions. Angele, this one was submitted ahead of time from Julie, who is a resource consultant. How do we as early childhood educators work with family managers, owners, and coworkers to keep this important yet difficult conversation going about diversity, race, and racism in the field longer term? She worries that they will make changes short term but not address the long-term changes in values and attitudes truly needed.
Yes, that is actually a key question, and that's why I want us to think about doing things right away, because it's not just in the emotion of the moment that we're going to say, oh, yes, 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 we believe in this and it's a good idea. But the reality, it's not in the big things that the problems are. It's in the little things. It's in that list of harming, for example. So it's what are the little things that we can do right away with our staff, with ourselves. So we continuously ask ourselves the questions and we start working. And that's where the checklist would be helpful too. But where, and the main question is, how are we addressing diversity? How are we addressing the behavior of the children that we don't like? Are we jumping to a conclusion that this child will not fit in? Are we jumping to the conclusion that there may be a disability behind the scenes that we don't know about, that we need to check on before we do our part of teaching children behavior too? So I think that, again, this is happening in many classrooms where we are doing a great job. And at the same time, we need to be constantly on the lookout, and on the lookout for our own biases, because yes, everybody's biased. But I should say that in our field and in our work, the work that we do every day, it is our first responsibility to check our biases. And if we can do it alone, some teams have found ways to do it together. And when they talk about their classroom or the children, they have that question in the back. I mean, you can probably put it on the poster. Are we doing our our conversations and our conversations in the teachers lounge are, what do our conversations sound like? Do we keep talking about children at risk? Do we keep talking, do we talk about climbing the walls, for example? So I give some suggestions about what kind of words we can even use to describe our work. So every day, Julie, we start tomorrow. Mm-hmm.
Great. And this comes from Tracy. She was wondering if you could perhaps add some suggestions for kindergarten and school age children, perhaps ways to integrate them into younger programs as leaders and role models for diversity. So getting children.
So for that question, I would need to know, yes, but diversity in many ways also needs to be mediated by adults. And so if we just put the children, yes, they will play with each other. They will understand how to play with an older child, and the older children will understand how to play with a younger child. So there's that kind of diversity. There is the age diversity. We can have some books. I would think that if we want, the easiest way to mediate that, if we want to have conversations, is to have book stories about diverse families, about and not just racial diversity, but families who do different things, where the parents have different occupations. And so that would be what I'm thinking about, if it makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. I have another question here from Kathy. Some of our families come from diverse religious and cultural backgrounds with a variety of celebratory traditions, including families who do not recognize any celebrations or birthdays. How do we navigate this diversity while providing an authentic and inclusive curriculum?
Oh, I love that question, because what better way to talk about diversity in your center than to talk about some families celebrate and some birthdays, for example, and some families don't. So if the family has a child in your center, they would know that some children celebrate and some don't. So let's say that if you have a tradition that every birthday gets celebrated, and everybody brings cupcakes and does all these nice things. But on the day of the child who doesn't have a birthday celebration in his home, in his family, either the child comes and nobody talks about that, or if they do indeed talk about birthdays, we will say, Angele doesn't, in her family, they don't believe in celebrating birthdays. But in Meredith's family, they do believe in celebrating birthdays. So families do different things in different ways. And, so if you are celebrating the other birthdays, and then the child who doesn't celebrate birthdays happen to be in the room, that's what that child is learning. Some families do, some families don't. I think that, and that could be part of the bias, that we think that celebrating birthdays is better than not celebrating. Why is there why do we need to quantify that? Is you either celebrate or you don't celebrate, and both ways of doing it is okay.
I'm going to kind of combine a couple of these because they're similar, but this is from Kimberly and Zune. How do you discuss diversity in your classroom if your school is not diverse in population? Zune had a similar question about the entire class only represented by 2 race groups, and Zune's is 2 to 3 years old. How do you help them understand?
So Louise Derman Sparks has a great book on what if all the children are white. but it probably would follow what if all the children are Black, or what if all the children are, so what do we do about that? Well, there are lots of good books. And I also have, so at the end of the book, there is a list that you can Google books on diversity for young children. And what you will find, so, I happen to have one on my table here. So if you have Peter's Chair, for example, I think you can see, okay. So Peter's Chair, this is a wonderful Black family who does all the things that families do. They have a baby, they love each other, they have little fights. And so what we can do is, if our classroom we believe is monocultural, and here I want to say something after, because it may not be. If we believe that our classroom is monocultural, then we bring books. We don't bring diversity books only when there is diversity children, whatever that is. We just have them, we bring them out all the time, and then we talk about it. And we don't ignore it. So if I was reading this book, and I've actually done that with recommending to teachers to do that, and when they do it, some of them are kind of nervous at the beginning, but when they do, they really like it, is that they will read the book, and then at the end of the book, they talk about the family, and then they say, did you notice that Peter is Black? And his mom, and his dad, and his little sister. Do we have any Black people in our classroom? No, we don't. But do we know any? Where do we know them from? Or maybe we don't. So let's find out more. And so this is one way where we don't have to have exhibit A of diversity in our classroom. We can, as educators, we can bring the ideas, and we can have this commitment to diversity that is not the only one that we have in front of our eyes, if that makes sense.
Yes. We have a question here from Adriana. Do you have any recommendations as to how to embrace and share about diversity without stereotyping any of the mentioned group? For an example, just because someone has a handicap does not mean they're not capable.
That they're not capable?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, very good. Well, the best way I think about that is to talk about it. And this is why it cannot be just a one moment. It cannot be, so if you have, if you don't have children in wheelchair in your classroom, for example, but you do have that wonderful set that you bought from the catalog on equipment, adaptive equipment for your dolls. So if you have that, you might notice that if you don't have anyone in your classroom who is in a wheelchair, that the children actually will not use this adaptive equipment for the dolls, because they just, it doesn't interest them, or they don't know how to use them, or they're a little worried about it. So this would be a perfect opportunity to, again, through books, through videos, and through talking about it, that KWL, what do we know about people with disabilities? And if you think about that, those dimensions, cultural dimensions I was showing you, the 16, ability is one of them. And children will know, they are not living in the bubble of your classroom or in the bubble of their family even, but in the larger community. So this will extend the talk. Of course, when I'm talking about that, we're talking probably about 3.5-year-olds and older. So the infants may not be able to talk about that as much. And maybe for the infants, their world is narrower. So that's okay. But when we have children who already have language, then we can address it through talking. And if we notice that they are not using the dolls adaptive equipment, then we bring it up ourselves. And we say, look what I have. And we're going, why do you think we have that? Why do you think we have crutches? And what do you think people can do who who may not be able to walk, but what do you think are the other things that they can do? So we are the adults who mediate that discussion on diversity.
Yeah, I do want to recommend a book set that Redleaf Press distributes. We're not the original publisher, but it is available on our site. It's called the Some Kids set. It's by Lola Schaefer, and it does that. So it's some kids use wheelchairs, some kids are deaf, and it kind of introduces that using photograph pictures. So great. Let's see, how are we doing on time? All right, I see a lot of questions still. But like I said, we're going to try to answer some of these offline in a separate video as well. Let's end with this one from Daryl here. Is discussing the current climate of our country in regards to Black Lives Matter a good topic to introduce inclusion and diversity with children?
Yes, the children are definitely seeing a lot of emotion around it, and they are seeing a lot of ideas, and some are positives and some may not be as much. And so how in the context, one is to wait for the teachable moment and hear the children talk, and then think about how to have conversations and deciding what are we going to do with what we know and what we are worried about. So it may be in the context of what you may be, what the families may be also saying and what they're telling you as the educator. So yes, the question is yes. I think the context is where we have to be sensitive to the context and not necessarily just bring it up as a topic as a lesson, but that we make the context organic. That's the word I was looking for. And the other thing I was thinking about, I live in Minneapolis, and of course we have this horrible situation and agony and distress in our city now for almost a month. And so I was thinking about that very common topic that we do in early childhood, which are community helpers. And community helpers always involves a police officer along with the nurse. And so when we start again with the children, how are we going to handle the police officer? It's also a very favorite outfit in the dramatic play corner. And so we are going to have to think about this in how we're going to work our good police officers into our topic of community helpers. I wouldn't take it out. I would have it. I would continue to have this as a theme for our classroom. And at the same time, in your classroom, you may have families who are very angry at the police and other families who are in the police force. And so it's part of that. We're making the diversity-rich environment because of our big emotions and because of our big situations. We're making it very real. This is not just about playing, play. I mean, I want the children to continue to play, and I want the children to play good and bad in their heads with us, with the adults. But we are making these topics heavy duty, and we should not eliminate them from our curriculum, because that's also the way that we can be more effective. We are, after all, the beginning, right? We have these little guys in our centers and our classrooms, and so we are at the beginning of helping them understand the world. And so we have to help them understand the world as it is. And we have to be super sensitive on how we do it, but we cannot ignore that it is.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your questions and comments in the chat. I've seen a lot of great ideas being shared. We are just going to end for the day. We will follow up with a recording of this video, the certificate of completion for joining us today, and these slides as PDFs. Thank you very much again for joining us. If you would like to sign up for our early childhood activities from Redleaf Press, it is a texting program that we've started earlier this year. You can do so on our website. It is free to register, and you can sign up for activities to be sent based on the age groups that you are working with. We are also offering 25% off all of Angele's books, which includes the book that we were talking about today, Creating Diversity-Rich Environments for Young Children. That is available immediately from Redleaf Press. It is available through our trade partners like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or your local independent bookstore. That should be arriving in early July, I believe July 7th, but if you'd like it faster, please feel free to order directly from Redleaf. Those purchases help us create more resources like Angele's books, like these webinars, and we really appreciate your support through all of this. And here Angele also did a webinar last month, I believe, about transitioning from the digital pre-K classroom to a kindergarten classroom. That is available on demand. We'll include a link to that as well if you didn't see it the first time around. And again, you'll be receiving a certificate of completion for joining us and registering today. And we look forward to doing more of these with you, Angele. Thank you again so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Yes, and I wish everybody well in your good work of creating diversity-rich environments.